Mayday, Mayday. This is the research vessel Pacific Surveyor. Engine failure, taking on water.
The distress call crackled through the radio of an old trawler as a storm tore across the Oregon coast. Rain lashed the deck. Waves crashed high enough to shake the engines. At the helm, an old captain gripped the wheel, jaw tight. He should have turned for harbor, but the call was only 2 miles away. So he turned the trawler into the storm, risking everything to save strangers, never knowing that choice would change his life forever. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming stories every day. The storm was coming in fast. Captain Marcus Brennan could see it from the wheelhouse of his fishing trawler, a massive wall of dark clouds moving straight toward them. At 65, Brennan had spent enough time on the water to know when weather was about to turn nasty. This one would hit hard. Second Chance was the name painted on his weathered boat. Funny how sometimes a name can tell a whole story without meaning to. Brennan's rough, calloused hands gripped the wheel confidently as the waves grew higher, rocking the small vessel. Those hands knew exactly what to do in a storm. Skills Brennan had picked up long before he ever became a fisherman, in a life he never talked about. "Cap, we should head in," Jack called from the deck. His voice carried concern but not panic. Jack Sullivan had been Brennan's first mate for 8 years now, long enough to know when to speak up and when to stay quiet. At 48, he was still younger than Brennan by nearly 2 decades, but old enough to respect experience. Brennan squinted at the horizon. The forecast had called for rough weather, sure, but nothing like this. Weather patterns had gotten harder to predict these last few years. Still, they had one more net to pull, one more haul before the season got tough. "One more pull, Jack," Brennan said, his voice steady. "Then we run for harbor." He knew it was a gamble, but a measured one. The clouds were still a ways off, and if they moved fast, they'd beat the worst of it. He'd learned long ago that the sea punished arrogance, but sometimes survival meant reading its moods and taking your shot before it turned. Jack hesitated, glancing at Danny, their youngest crew member at 33. Danny Torres was still learning the ropes, literally and figuratively. He'd come up from San Diego 3 years ago, looking for work and found a home on the Second Chance. Now he watched both older men, waiting to see what would happen. "That's cutting it close, Cap," Jack said. "We've cut it closer," Brennan replied. It was true, but that didn't make Jack feel any better. He knew Brennan's history, at least parts of it. Knew the captain had been Navy once, way back. A rescue swimmer, the most dangerous job you could volunteer for. But something had happened, something that made Brennan leave that life behind, and take up fishing instead. Whatever it was, Brennan never spoke of it. Not in 8 years. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping rain across the deck. Danny stumbled, caught himself on the railing. The boat pitched hard to starboard, then back to port. Brennan's hands moved expertly, adjusting their heading, keeping them steady. "All right, get that net up now," Brennan commanded. "Fast and clean. Then we're heading home." The 2 crew members moved into action. They'd done this dance 1,000 times, working in sync, fighting against the ocean's strength. The winch groaned as it pulled the heavy net from the depths. Fish spilled across the deck, silver bodies thrashing in the growing puddles of seawater and rain. But Brennan wasn't watching the catch. His eyes were fixed on the storm wall approaching from the west. It was moving faster than any storm he'd seen in years. The clouds were angry, bruised purple and black, churning like something alive and furious. His weather radio crackled to life. "All vessels, this is Coast Guard Station Newport. National Weather Service has upgraded the storm warning to severe. Repeat, severe storm warning now in effect. All vessels should seek immediate shelter. Winds expected to exceed 60 knots with waves up to 20 feet. This is not a drill. 60 knots, 20-foot waves." Brennan had been through worse, but not in a long time, and not in a boat as small as the Second Chance. "That's it, we're done," Brennan announced. "Secure the catch and tie down everything. We're running for it." But even as he spoke, he knew they'd waited too long. A flicker of guilt cut through him. Jack and Danny trusted his judgment without question, and if he was wrong, it would be on him. The storm was going to catch them. The only question was how bad it would be when it did. The rain came first, hard, horizontal, driven by winds that howled like something out of a nightmare. Brennan turned the second chance toward Newport Bay, engine straining, but the sea had other ideas. Waves reared and crashed without rhythm, tossing the trawler like a toy. Brennan fought the wheel, every movement a battle for balance. Jack and Danny stumbled into the wheelhouse, drenched and gripping whatever they could. Danny looked pale but steady, earning Brennan's quiet respect. "How far to harbor?" Jack shouted over the wind. Brennan glanced at the GPS. 45 minutes in good weather. In this maybe 90, and if we're not lucky. Brennan didn't answer. They all knew the truth. The sea didn't care how long you'd been sailing. The radio crackled again. Voices from other boats, clipped and panicked, calling their positions. Some had made it to harbor. Others, like the second chance, were still running for their lives. Then a new voice broke through, young, desperate. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is the research vessel Pacific Surveyor. We have lost engine power, and are taking on water. Position 44 degrees, 38 minutes north, 124 degrees, 12 minutes west. We are 6 souls aboard. Repeat, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday." Brennan's hands tightened on the wheel. That position was close. Very close. "Coast Guard Station Newport, this is Pacific Surveyor. Do you copy?" Static. Then Pacific Surveyor, this is Coast Guard Newport. We copy your Mayday. We are launching rescue operations, but weather conditions are severe. Estimated time to your position is 90 minutes. Can you stay afloat that long? Another long pause. Negative, Coast Guard. We're listing badly. Taking water fast. We estimate 10 to 15 minutes before we lose buoyancy. 90 minutes. They didn't have 90 minutes. Brennan looked at his radar screen. There, a blip, right where the Pacific Surveyor said they were. Less than 2 miles away. Maybe 20 minutes in these conditions. Every instinct Brennan had developed over decades at sea told him to keep going. Head for harbor. Save his own crew. Let the Coast Guard handle it. That was their job. His job was to get Jack and Danny home safe, but something else stirred in his chest. Something old and familiar and impossible to ignore. "Cap." Jack was looking at him with knowing eyes. "Don't even think about it. They won't make it 90 minutes, Brennan said quietly. "That's not our problem. They're 2 miles away. In a hurricane, Cap, 2 miles might as well be 200. Brennan knew Jack was right. Every logical part of his brain agreed. But logic had never been his strongest suit when lives were on the line. That was why he'd become a rescue swimmer in the first place, all those years ago. It was why he'd been good at it. It was also why he'd left. "I was Navy rescue trained," Brennan said. 23 years ago. "Yeah, but the training doesn't leave you. We've got equipment. We're the closest vessel. We're a fishing boat, not a Coast Guard cutter," Jack countered. "And you haven't done that job in over 2 decades. 23 years, Brennan thought. 23 years since the last time he jumped into rough water to save someone. 23 years since the mission that had ended his career and started all the nightmares. Danny spoke up, his voice steadier than Brennan expected. "What are we gonna do, Cap?" That was the question, wasn't it? What were they going to do? Brennan thought about the name painted on his boat. Second Chance. He'd named it that as a reminder that he'd been given another shot at life, another chance to matter, even if it was just as a fisherman instead of a hero. But maybe second chances worked differently than he'd thought. Maybe they weren't just about starting over. Maybe they were about finishing what you'd started. "We're going to help them," Brennan said. Jack closed his eyes. "Marcus, don't do this." For a long second no one moved. The storm hammered against the glass like it wanted in. Then Danny spoke, voice barely steady. "If they're out there, Cap, we can't just let them sink." Jack exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "God help us." He met Brennan's eyes. "All right, let's do it." Brennan felt the weight of their trust like a hand on his chest, heavy, undeserved. He wished they'd argued harder. He told Danny to ready the survival gear while he swung the wheel toward the storm, guilt riding with him as the second chance plunged into its teeth. "You're not going in the water," Jack said. It wasn't a question, it was a plea. "I'm not planning to." Brennan lied. But if I have to, I need to be ready. The truth was, he knew exactly how this would play out. He'd done it before. The only way to get people off a sinking ship in a storm like this was to go in after them, one by one if necessary, and bring them back. His body might be 65 years old, but his training was still there, buried deep. Muscle memory doesn't forget, even when you try to make it. The waves grew worse. The second chance climbed mountains of water and surfed down the back sides, engines screaming. Brennan's world narrowed to the wheel, the compass, the radar screen showing that blip getting closer, and in his mind, unbidden, came the memories. Night missions off the Horn of Africa. Helicopter deployments in 15-foot seas. The feel of harness straps biting into his shoulders as he was lowered into churning water. The weight of another human being in his arms as he fought to keep both their heads above water. The memory of the one time he'd failed. Lieutenant Kyle Hartman, 26 years old, dead in Brennan's arms because of a defective carabiner that should have been caught during inspection. "I see them," Danny shouted, pointing through the rain-streaked windshield. Brennan saw it too. The Pacific Surveyor was a bigger vessel than the Second Chance, maybe 90 feet long, but she was in bad shape. Listing heavily to port, her deck awash with every wave. Even from here, Brennan could see people clustered on the high side, holding onto railings, waving desperately. "Coast Guard, this is fishing vessel Second Chance." Brennan called into the radio. "We have visual on Pacific Surveyor, we are moving to assist." "Second Chance, this is Coast Guard Newport. Negative. You are not equipped for rescue operations in these conditions. Maintain safe distance and await our arrival." Brennan didn't respond. He was too busy judging angles, distances, the timing of the waves. Getting close enough to help without getting swamped himself or colliding with the larger vessel that was going to take everything he had. "Jack, I need you on the deck with Danny. Prepare to take survivors aboard. Tie yourselves to something solid. Don't become part of the problem." "And what are you going to do?" Brennan didn't answer. He was already unbuttoning his jacket. The Pacific Surveyor was dying. Brennan could see it clearly as he brought the Second Chance as close as he dared. The research vessel's hull had breached below the waterline, water pouring in faster than any pump could handle. 5 people clung to the tilted deck, a bearded man who looked like the lead scientist, 2 women, 1 younger man, and an older engineer. All in bright orange life jackets. At least they'd had time to prepare. "Pacific Surveyor, this is Second Chance." Brennan shouted into the radio. "We're throwing lines, secure them and we'll pull you across one at a time." 30 feet of raging sea separated the boats, an impossible heaving gulf, but it was the only option. Danny timed the throw perfectly. The weighted bag arced across and landed on the Surveyor's deck. The bearded man, Dr. Graham Pierce, Brennan learned later, snatched it and tied it off. "Good," Brennan yelled. "Clip in and go one at a time. Don't let go no matter what." A young woman went first. She jumped, vanished in foam, then surfaced, flailing. Jack and Danny hauled hand over hand, dragging her against the hull and over the rail. She collapsed on deck, coughing, but alive. 2 more followed. Each crossing was a fight against the storm, the gap widening and closing like a living thing. That left 1 person on the Surveyor, the mission lead. Through the rain Brennan saw her standing near the companionway instead of the railing, staring down. "No," Brennan muttered. Pierce, drenched and gasping beside him, said Dr. Rachel Whitmore. She organized the expedition. Said she needed something from the lab. Data, I think. She's been below 3 minutes. "She's not coming up," Brennan said grimly. Pierce nodded. "It's 20 years of work, reef restoration, climate modeling. If it's lost, it can be done again." Brennan cut in, "But only if she's alive to do it." He looked across at the Surveyor. The list was worse, the bow already half submerged. Maybe 6 minutes before she went under. 1 person still aboard, choosing data over life. "I'm going," Brennan said. Jack grabbed his arm. "Cap, you can barely stand. Let me or Danny, neither of you are trained for this." Brennan stripped off his soaked jacket, hands shaking from cold. "She won't listen to a stranger. She might listen to me." Your body can't take another swim, Jack said quietly. You'll die out there, maybe, but she'll die for sure if I don't. He dove before they could argue. The cold hit like a fist, but his mind went still. Swim. Breathe. Don't think. He reached the surveyor and hauled himself over the rail. The deck was now pitched 45 degrees, water sloshing around his boots. The whole ship groaned like a wounded animal. Dr. Whitmore, he shouted. Her voice came faintly from below. In the lab, almost done, just need a few more minutes. You don't have a few minutes. He fought his way down the tilted passage. Water surged up from below, red emergency lights flashing across the flooding corridor. Dr. Whitmore, waist deep in the lab, surrounded by floating binders and swaying cables, frantically transferring data between drives. She was maybe 52, streaks of gray in her dark hair, glasses sliding down her nose as she typed with trembling, wet fingers. There was something fierce in her eyes that reminded Brennan of himself years ago, when he still believed willpower could beat the sea. Dr. Whitmore, he said, raising his voice over the rush of water. We need to go, now. 5 more minutes, she shot back, not looking up. Her hands flew across the keyboard. This ship will be gone in 5, Brennan barked. Whatever you're saving won't matter if you're dead. You don't understand, she said, frantic. This is 20 years of research, reef restoration, temperature data, species mapping. If it's lost, everything's lost. It's not, Brennan said, wading closer as the water rose around his thighs. It's in your head, the method, the vision. You can do it again, but not if you drown here. Tears mingled with the sea water on her face. I can't just leave it, she whispered. Do you know how many dives, how many years this could save the reefs? The ship convulsed, cutting her off. Somewhere below, metal screamed. The water surged from waist to chest. Equipment broke free, crashing against walls. Floating hard drives spun past like ghosts of her life's work. The lights died, leaving only the gray daylight from the storm above. Whitmore let out a small shattered sound. Okay, she whispered. You're right, let's go. They fought up the companionway, waves battering them, the ship listing harder with each groan of its wounded hull. The deck was nearly vertical now, the Pacific Surveyor dying fast. Across the gap, the Second Chance pitched in the storm, its yellow mooring line still taut between them. Not meant for rescues, but it was all they had. Brennan tied the rope around her waist, fingers numb, checking every knot twice. When you hit the water, keep your head up, he shouted. Kick, my crew will pull you in. What about you? I'll be right behind you, he lied gently. The rope might not hold two, but there wasn't time to explain. She looked terrified, but nodded. The deck lurched again, throwing debris past them. Brennan didn't wait. On 3. 1, 2, 3. She jumped. He followed a heartbeat later, catching the rope behind her, wrapping his legs for leverage as the sea swallowed them both. The Surveyor let out a final wrenching groan, metal twisting, air escaping, and began its plunge. The suction dragged them backward toward the abyss. Kick, Brennan yelled, one arm braced on the rope, the other guiding her forward. The current clawed at their legs, the storm howling in their ears. Whitmore screamed but kept fighting. On the Second Chance, Jack and Danny were hauling like madmen, pulling hand over hand through the torrent. 50 feet. 40. 30. Brennan's shoulders burned, his lungs were knives, the ocean wanted them too. Then came the crack, sharp, terrible. The rope groaned, fibers splitting under strain. Brennan looked up, it was fraying near the cleat. Pull, he roared. Now. Jack and Danny heaved together, muscles straining. The rope jerked. Brennan felt his shoulder tear, but kept his grip. The suction eased as the Surveyor vanished beneath the waves, swallowed by foam and darkness. They were still alive. The tension slackened just enough for Brennan to kick again, dragging Whitmore the last few yards until strong hands reached down and hauled her aboard. Got her, Danny shouted. Whitmore collapsed on deck, coughing up seawater, her glasses gone, face streaked with tears and salt. Brennan reached for the rail, exhausted, every limb screaming. 10 feet. Then the rope snapped. The sound was like a gunshot. The sudden release flung him backward into the sea. "Cap!" Jack shouted. Brennan went under, the cold slamming into his chest like a hammer. The world narrowed to gray water and the taste of salt. His body, already spent, refused to move. So this is it, he thought distantly. This is how it ends. But instinct took over, the same training that had kept him alive half a lifetime ago. He kicked weakly, breaking the surface just long enough to gasp. The second chance loomed a few yards away, rising and falling with the swells. "Throw the line." Jack's voice cut through the storm. Something hit the water near him, a new rope, coiled and bright against the gray. Brennan lunged, fingers closing around it. Pain flared through his shoulder, but he held on. They pulled. Slowly, impossibly, he moved toward the boat. Every wave tried to tear him away, every breath burned. But then hands grabbed his arms, rough and desperate, dragging him up and over the rail. He hit the deck hard, coughing up seawater. The storm raged around them, the wind shrieking through the rigging, but he was alive. They both were. Whitmore lay a few feet away, still trembling, clutching the soaked data drives she'd managed to stuff into a waterproof bag before the flood. Brennan crawled to her, every muscle shaking. "It's gone," she whispered. "Everything I couldn't save, gone." Brennan nodded, too tired to speak. Around them the ocean boiled with wreckage. The last traces of the Pacific Surveyor, disappearing into the deep. He looked up at his crew, their faces ghostly in the rain. "Cut us loose," he rasped. "We're not losing another one." Jack moved to the cleat, knife flashing in the dim light. The frayed rope fell away, and the second chance drifted free, rocking in the storm but steady. For a long moment, no one spoke, only the sea and the wind and the sound of their own breathing. Finally Whitmore turned toward Brennan. "Why did you come back for me?" He managed a faint smile. "Because you were still down there." She stared at him, something unspoken passing between them, understanding, gratitude, and the terrible knowledge of what they'd both just lost and gained. The second chance rode the waves, small but unbroken. The storm still raged, but they were moving, alive, afloat, and somehow still fighting. For one heart-stopping moment, Brennan was free-floating in the churning water, the second chance just feet away, Jack reaching desperately over the railing. The suction from the sinking Pacific Surveyor, pulling him backward with terrifying strength. This is it, Brennan thought with strange clarity. This is how it ends, just like Kyle Hartman. In the water, unable to save myself, dying for the job I couldn't leave behind. But then Danny was there too, both of them stretching out over the railing, as far as they could reach, Jack shouting his name. Danny's face twisted with effort. Jack caught Brennan's wrist in an iron grip. Danny grabbed his jacket collar with both hands. Together they pulled, fighting against the suction, fighting against the ocean that wanted to claim one more victim, fighting to save the man who'd just saved 6 others. Inch by inch, they dragged him toward the boat. Brennan's chest scraped against the hull, his ribs protesting, a sharp pain that told him something might have cracked. But he was moving forward, not backward. Forward toward life, not backward toward death. With one final heave that seemed to take the last of their strength, they pulled him up and over the railing. Brennan collapsed on the deck, beside Dr. Whitmore, water pouring from his mouth and nose, his 65-year-old body completely and utterly spent. He'd done it. Against all odds, against all reason, against the limits of his own aging body and the ocean's fury, he'd done it. "You stupid, crazy old man," Jack said, and he was definitely crying now, not even trying to hide it. Tears mixing with rain and sea water on his face. "I really thought we'd lost you. I really thought that was it." Brennan couldn't speak yet, could barely breathe. But he managed a weak thumbs up, which was about all he had in him. Behind them, the Pacific Surveyor slipped beneath the waves with a final bubbling sigh, taking 20 years of irreplaceable scientific data and millions of dollars of research equipment with her. But the people who'd been aboard were alive, all 6 of them, shivering and exhausted, but breathing on the deck of the second chance. That was what mattered. Data could be collected again. Equipment could be replaced. Ships could be rebuilt. Levs couldn't. "Let's go home," Brennan finally managed to say when he had enough breath. "I think we've earned it." The storm was already beginning to ease, the worst of it moving inland. Not gone, not by a long shot, but the winds were dropping from hurricane force to merely dangerous. The waves were still huge, but no longer the liquid mountains they'd been. The Second Chance turned toward Newport Bay, riding the still massive swells, carrying 9 people instead of 3. Brennan stood at the wheel on shaking legs, soaked to the bone, bruised, exhausted beyond anything he'd ever experienced. His body would make him pay for this for days, maybe weeks. His ribs ached with every breath. His muscles felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. But people were alive who wouldn't be if he'd made a different choice. 6 strangers whose names he barely knew, but who were alive because he'd remembered who he used to be, because he'd been willing to jump one more time. That was enough. Newport Bay looked like a postcard when the Second Chance finally limped into port 2.5 hours later. The storm had moved inland, leaving behind clear skies and that peculiar sharp light that comes after bad weather, everything crisp and clean and almost painfully bright. The Coast Guard was already there, along with what looked like half the town. Word had gotten out about the rescue, apparently. Brennan would have preferred to slip in quietly, unload his passengers, get his crew warm food and dry clothes, and sleep for about 3 days. But that wasn't going to happen. As soon as they tied up at the dock, they were swarmed. Paramedics came aboard to check the survivors from the Pacific Surveyor. Coast Guard officers wanted statements. Media crews were setting up cameras on the pier, and somewhere in the crowd, Brennan heard someone calling his name. He ignored it all. His focus was on making sure the 6 people they'd saved were properly cared for, making sure Jack and Danny were okay, making sure his boat was properly secured. His hands moved on autopilot, going through the familiar routines, even though every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his battered body. Captain Brennan. A reporter was pushing her way toward the boat, microphone in hand, cameraman trailing behind. "Can you tell us about the rescue? How did you—" "No comment," Brennan said without looking at her. "But our viewers would love to hear." I said no comment. His tone left no room for argument. Jack appeared at his elbow, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "You should let the paramedics check you out, Cap. You look like hell." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Your lips are still blue, you're shaking. And you're holding your side like something's broken. Just bruised ribs from hitting the hull. Nothing I haven't had before. Still should get it checked. Later. First I need to make sure everyone else is taken care of." Dr. Whitmore appeared, wrapped in a thermal blanket despite the warm afternoon sun. Her hair still dripping seawater. "Captain Brennan," she said, her voice still rough from swallowing half the ocean. "I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't come for us, if you hadn't come back for me, specifically after I was stupid enough to, you'd be dead." Brennan finished bluntly, "But you're not, so no thanks necessary, just doing what needed to be done." "That's not true, and you know it," she said, her eyes intense behind her still-fogged glasses. "Most captains would have kept going, would have saved their own crew and let the Coast Guard handle it. You risked everything to help strangers. You even gave your own safety line to Frank Palmer and trusted a mooring rope for your own life. That's not just doing what needed to be done. That's heroism. It's survival instinct," Brennan corrected. "You can't leave people to die when you have the means to help. That's not heroism. That's just being human. Then there aren't enough humans like you in the world." She paused, seeming to gather courage for what she wanted to say next. "I need to tell you something. I called my father from the Coast Guard station while the paramedics were checking me over. Told him what happened. He wants to see you." Brennan felt his entire body go cold in a way that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. "Your father, Vice Admiral Robert Whitmore, United States Navy 3rd Fleet Commander. She paused, searching Brennan's face for recognition, and clearly finding it. "You know who he is, don't you?" "Yeah," Brennan said quietly, his voice flat. "I know who he is, Robert Whitmore.
The name Brennan had spent 23 years trying to forget, trying to bury under layers of fishing nets and salt spray and the simple rhythms of life at sea. The commanding officer who'd been there on that last mission in the Gulf of Aden, who'd watched Brennan fail to save Kyle Hartman, who'd been part of the investigation that Brennan had assumed ended his career as a rescue swimmer. The man Brennan had spent 23 years avoiding. He's here, Dr. Whitmore continued. In Newport Bay, he flew in as soon as he heard about the Pacific Surveyor going down. When I told him you saved us. When I told him your name, she hesitated. He said it was important that he speak with you, that it's been too long. He asked me to give you his contact information. No, Captain Brennan. I said no. Brennan's voice was harder now, edges of steel showing through despite his exhaustion. I appreciate his concern for his daughter. I'm glad she's alive, but I've got nothing to say to him. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. He turned and walked away before she could argue further, but he could feel her eyes on his back, could feel the weight of the past pressing down on him like a physical burden. 23 years. He'd managed to avoid this confrontation for 23 years. And now because he'd done the right thing and saved her life, it was all coming back. Jack caught up with him near the stern where Brennan was coiling lines with more force than necessary, his hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and cold and something else he didn't want to name. Everything okay, Cap? Fine. That didn't look fine. You got all tense when she mentioned her father. Drop it, Jack. Is this related to why you left the Navy? Because I've known you 8 years and you've never talked about it. But maybe it's time. I said drop it. Brennan's tone left no room for argument, the voice of a captain giving an order that would be obeyed. Jack held up his hands in surrender. Okay, but for what it's worth, Cap, whatever happened back then you more than made up for it today. 6 lives. That counts for something. Brennan didn't respond, he just kept coiling the rope, the familiar motion giving his hands something to do while his mind tried to process everything that had just happened. They finished securing the boat in silence. The survivors had all been taken off for medical evaluation and observation. Most of the crowd was dispersing, though some of the news crews were still hanging around, hoping for a statement. Brennan avoided them all, slipping into his small office above the marine supply shop as soon as he could. But the sense of unease remained, settled in his chest like a weight. Brennan knew Robert Whitmore. The man was Navy through and through. When he wanted something, he made it happen. If he wanted a meeting, he'd find a way to get one, whether Brennan liked it or not. Brennan was proven right 2 days later. He'd spent those 2 days trying to return to normal life, to pretend the rescue had been just another day on the water, repairing damaged equipment on the second chance, replacing the yellow rope he'd nearly died on, catching up on paperwork, avoiding phone calls from reporters and well-wishers and people who wanted to hear the story firsthand. His body ached in places he'd forgotten existed. Every muscle screamed when he moved. The bruised ribs on his right side made every breath a small agony. But he kept moving, because that's what you did. You pushed through. You didn't give the pain permission to stop you. On the morning of the 3rd day he was in his small office above the marine supply shop, little more than a desk, a filing cabinet, a coffee maker that only worked sometimes, and a window overlooking the harbor when he heard the helicopter. Not just any helicopter. A Navy Seahawk, the distinctive hump of its twin turbines announcing it long before it came into view. It swept over the harbor once, low enough that Brennan could see the door gunner position and the crew inside, then circled back and landed in the parking lot behind the Coast Guard station, precisely where the white markings indicated. Subtle, Brennan muttered to himself, not even looking up from the maintenance log he was pretending to read. He knew what was coming, had known it was coming since Dr. Whitmore mentioned her father's name, had been dreading it for 2 days. 20 minutes later there was a knock on his office door. Not a tentative knock, but a firm one. Military, confident. The knock of someone used to doors being opened when they knocked. It's open, Brennan called without looking up from his paperwork. The door opened, boot steps on the wooden floor, military issue from the sound and rhythm of them. Precise, measured, then a voice Brennan hadn't heard in 23 years but would have recognized anywhere. Hello, Marcus. Brennan looked up slowly, deliberately meeting the gaze of the man standing in his doorway. Vice Admiral Robert Whitmore stood there in his service uniform, ribbons and medals across his chest, telling stories of a long and distinguished career.
He'd aged, of course, hair gone from black to steel gray, lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before, a slight stoop to his shoulders that suggested the weight of command. But the bearing was the same, straight, confident, commanding. A man used to being obeyed. "Admiral," Brennan acknowledged coolly, not standing, not offering his hand. "May I come in? It's a free country." Whitmore entered, closed the door behind him with a soft click, and stood in the small space. Brennan didn't offer him the only other chair, a battered folding chair that wobbled, partly because he wasn't feeling generous, partly because some petty part of him wanted to make the Admiral stand. "I wanted to thank you," Whitmore began, his voice formal but with an undercurrent of genuine emotion, "for saving my daughter's life. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't turned your boat around, if you hadn't gone back for her when she refused to leave, she'd be dead." Brennan finished bluntly, "But she's not, so we're done here. Marcus, it's Captain Brennan. Or just Brennan. We're not on a first-name basis, Admiral. Haven't been for 23 years. Whitmore sighed, a sound of weariness and regret. "I suppose I deserve that. You deserve worse than that. Now if there's nothing else, I have work to do." Brennan looked back down at his paperwork, a clear dismissal. But Whitmore didn't leave. He stayed right where he was, standing at attention in the middle of the small office. "I came to apologize." That got Brennan's attention. He looked up sharply, unable to hide his surprise. "Apologize for what?" "For what happened 23 years ago, for letting you leave, for not trying harder to make you understand that what happened to Lieutenant Hartman wasn't your fault, for failing you when you needed your commanding officer most." Brennan felt his jaw clench, old anger rising like bile. "Understand what?" His voice was rising now, volume and pitch both increasing despite his efforts to stay calm. "That I failed. That I got Kyle Hartman killed. That I wasn't good enough to do the job I was trained for. That I couldn't save him despite all that expensive training and all that practice. That I had to watch him die in my arms because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, wasn't good enough. None of that is true." Whitmore's voice was calm but firm, a stark contrast to Brennan's rising emotion. "Isn't it? I was there, Admiral. I was the one who jumped in after him when his harness failed. I was the one who reached him. I was the one who tried to keep his head above water while we waited for the pickup. I was the one who couldn't save him. So you'll forgive me if I don't buy whatever revisionist history you're selling to make yourself feel better about losing a swimmer. It's not revisionist history, it's the truth." Whitmore stepped closer, his voice still controlled but with an intensity that demanded attention. "Marcus, I need you to listen to me. Really listen, not just wait for your turn to argue. The official report from that mission, the one you never read because you submitted your resignation 2 days after the incident and left before it was finalized, it cleared you of any wrongdoing. The board found that you followed procedure perfectly. Hartman's death was ruled an accident, caused by equipment failure. Specifically, a defective carabiner on his harness that should have been caught during the pre-mission inspection but wasn't. The metal had a manufacturing flaw that caused it to fail under load, not operator error, not swimmer error, not your fault." Brennan felt like he'd been punched in the gut, like all the air had been driven from his lungs. The room seemed to tilt. "That's not, you're lying." "I'm not. The report is a matter of public record. You can request a copy through FOIA if you don't believe me. In fact," Whitmore pulled a folder from his briefcase, setting it carefully on Brennan's cluttered desk, "I brought one with me. I've been carrying it for 23 years, hoping I'd get a chance to show it to you. Hoping you'd come back, hoping I'd get to tell you the truth." Brennan stared at the folder like it might contain a live grenade. "I don't want to read it. I think you need to. Please, Marcus, read it. Let yourself off the hook you've been hanging from for 2 decades. With hands that shook more than he wanted to admit, more than he could control, Brennan opened the folder. The document was there, official Navy letterhead, classification markings, dated 23 years ago. He scanned the pages, his eyes catching on key phrases that seemed to jump off the page, each one a small detonation in his understanding of his own past. Catastrophic equipment failure, due to manufacturing defect. Operator followed all established protocols without deviation. Rescue attempt conducted with exceptional skill, bravery and adherence to training standards. No fault attributed to aviation rescue swimmer first class Marcus Brennan. Carabiner failure should have been detected during standard pre-mission equipment inspection. Responsibility for this tragedy lies with quality control oversight in the supply chain, not with operational personnel. Swimmer Brennan's actions represent the highest traditions of naval aviation rescue operations. At the bottom of the report, a note in Whitmore's own handwriting, the ink slightly faded but still clearly legible. Aviation Rescue Swimmer First Class Marcus Brennan represents the absolute best of Navy rescue operations. His actions during this mission were heroic, and though we lost Lieutenant Hartman, it was not due to any failure on Brennan's part. The defective equipment should have been caught during inspection. This tragedy falls on our supply chain protocols and quality control, not our people. Swimmer Brennan performed flawlessly under impossible conditions. He executed textbook rescue procedures and did everything humanly possible to save Lieutenant Hartman. We are diminished by his absence from our ranks. I would trust him with any rescue, in any conditions, without hesitation. Vice Admiral Robert Whitmore Brennan read it twice, then a third time, his eyes blurring slightly, though whether from exhaustion or emotion he couldn't say. The words didn't change. They couldn't be real. This couldn't be real. 23 years, he'd carried that guilt for 23 years, and it had all been, I don't understand, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. If this is true, then why did I get discharged? Why was I pushed out? You weren't discharged, Whitmore said quietly, pulling the folding chair over and sitting down without asking permission, suddenly looking every one of his years. You resigned, Marcus. 2 days after the mission, before the investigation was even complete, before we could tell you that you weren't being blamed, before anyone could explain what had really happened, you submitted your resignation, cleared out your locker, and disappeared. But I thought, everyone thought you were a hero. Whitmore corrected gently, everyone except you. You condemned yourself, Marcus. You decided you'd failed, and nothing anyone could have said would have convinced you otherwise. So you ran, and He paused, genuine regret crossing his features. I didn't try hard enough to stop you. I should have. That's what I'm apologizing for. I tried to contact you. I called your apartment, but you'd already cleared out. I sent letters to your family address in Pennsylvania, but they came back marked addressee unknown. I even tried to reach you through some of your swim buddies, but you'd cut all ties. You didn't want to be found. Brennan's world was tilting, spinning, his entire understanding of his life crumbling and rebuilding itself simultaneously. I spent 23 years, I know, punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. And I'm sorry. I should have gone to your apartment that first night. Should have sat with you until you believed me. Should have made you stay until the investigation cleared you. Should have pulled rank if necessary. But I respected your right to resign. I thought you just needed some time, that you'd come back once you'd processed everything. And then you vanished, and I couldn't find you. I changed my name, Brennan admitted. Well, went back to my mother's maiden name. Used to be Marcus Brennan Hayes, dropped the Hayes, made it harder to track. I figured something like that. I looked for you for 3 years, Marcus. Had people checking databases, following leads. Then I stopped, figured if you wanted to stay gone, that was your choice. But I never stopped hoping you'd come back. They sat in silence for a long moment. Brennan stared at the report, at Whitmore's handwritten words from 2 decades ago, trying to process this new reality. All those years, all that guilt, all that running, all the lives he could have saved if he just stayed, if he just waited 2 more days for the investigation to conclude. Why are you telling me this now? Brennan asked finally, his voice hoarse. Why not just let it go? Why dredge all this up? Because you saved my daughter's life, Whitmore said simply. Because I watched the Coast Guard debriefing video. They had a camera on their cutter monitoring the situation. I saw what you did out there in that storm. 6 successful rescues in conditions that would have killed most active duty swimmers half your age. I saw you give your safety line to a panicking victim, and trust a mooring rope for your own life. I saw you go back into a sinking ship for one more person. And I realized that you never stopped being a rescue swimmer, Marcus. You just stopped believing you had the right to be one. He pulled another document from his briefcase, this one crisp and new, which is why I'm here to offer you a job. Brennan blinked, pulled from his spiraling thoughts. A job.
civilian contractor position with the Navy, training the next generation of rescue swimmers at our facility right here in Newport, teaching them what you know, not just the technical skills, though those are important, teaching them the mindset, how to handle failure, how to understand that you can do everything right and still lose someone, and that doesn't make you a failure, how to get back in the water after the worst day of your life, making sure they know they're supported even when things go wrong, making sure they don't carry guilt that isn't theirs to carry. I'm 65 years old, I'm a fisherman, I haven't been in a Navy facility in 2 decades, and you just proved that none of that matters. What matters is skill, experience, mental toughness, and the willingness to jump when others won't. You have all of those in abundance. Age is just a number, Marcus. You demonstrated that pretty definitively 2 days ago. I don't know. Brennan's voice trailed off, his mind spinning with possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. You don't have to decide now, Whitmore said, standing, somehow making the motion seem formal and respectful despite the tiny office. Think about it. I'm in town for another week, staying at the Naval Air Station. Come find me when you've made your decision. Or don't. But Marcus, he paused at the door, his hand on the knob. I hope you'll seriously consider it. We need people like you. People who understand what this job really costs. People who've been broken and put themselves back together. People who know that failure is part of the job, not the end of it. That's who should be teaching our swimmers, not the ones who've never failed, the ones who failed and learned to keep swimming anyway. He moved to leave, then paused again. One more thing. What you said to Rachel on the ship, about how her research could be done again, by her, after she survived. That was exactly the right thing to say. The only thing that mattered in that moment was that she lived. Everything else can be rebuilt, redone, replaced. Lives can't. I know, Brennan said quietly, thinking about Kyle Hartman, about all the lives he'd saved over the years, about the one he couldn't save. I don't think you do, not yet, not fully. Whitmore's gaze was penetrating but not unkind. You've spent 23 years trying to replace what you lost instead of accepting that some things can't be replaced. Kyle Hartman is gone, but you're still here, and you still have so much to give, so much to teach, so many lives you could save, not just by pulling people out of the water, but by training the next generation to do it right. Don't waste the rest of your life punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault, not when you could be making sure no one else carries the same burden. Whitmore left, the door closing softly behind him. He sat staring at the report. 23 years of guilt, undone by a few lines of text. It would take time to believe, but for the first time, he wanted to try. Brennan didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying Whitmore's words in his head, examining them from every angle, looking for the lie, or the trick, or the hidden meaning that would make them less real. There wasn't one. He knew it, even though he didn't want to admit it. Kyle Hartman's death hadn't been his fault. The board had cleared him. The equipment had failed, not the swimmer. He'd left the Navy on his own, driven out by guilt and shame that he'd imposed on himself, not that anyone else had placed on him. 23 years. 23 years of carrying that weight, of believing he'd failed, of running away from who he really was. And for what? Around 3 in the morning, Brennan gave up on sleep. He got dressed in the dark, wincing at the pain in his ribs, and drove to the marina. The Second Chance sat peacefully at her berth, rocking gently with the tide, looking exactly as she always had, weathered, reliable, home. He climbed aboard and went to the wheelhouse, settling into the captain's chair that had been his refuge for so many years. This boat had saved him, in a way, given him purpose when he'd lost everything else, given him a reason to get up in the morning, given him Jack and Danny, who'd become something like family. But now he had to ask himself an uncomfortable question. Had he been living here, or hiding here? Thought I might find you out here. Brennan looked up. Jack stood on the dock, hands in his pockets, wearing the same clothes he'd had on yesterday, like he hadn't slept either. Can't sleep? Brennan asked. Could ask you the same thing. Jack climbed aboard and joined Brennan in the wheelhouse, settling into the co-pilot seat with a familiar ease. You've been different since the Admiral showed up. Want to talk about it? Not particularly. I'll take that as a yes. Jack made himself comfortable, clearly not planning to leave. What did he want? Brennan considered lying, or telling Jack it was none of his business. But after 8 years of working together, of trusting each other with their lives on rough seas, the man deserved better than that. He offered me a job, training rescue swimmers for the Navy, says I still have skills worth passing on. Jack absorbed this information without surprise. And you're considering it? It wasn't a question. I don't know what I'm doing, Brennan admitted. I just found out that everything I believed about my past was wrong. That I left the Navy for no good reason. That I've been punishing myself for 23 years over something that wasn't my fault. Over equipment failure that killed Kyle Hartman, not anything I did or didn't do. The mission that went bad, Jack said. It wasn't a question this time either. How did you, Cap? I've been your first mate for 8 years. You think I didn't notice that you never talk about your Navy days, that you get quiet whenever anyone mentions rescue operations, that you named this boat Second Chance like you were trying to convince yourself of something, that you keep a small photo in your locker of a group of swimmers, but you never look at it. I knew something happened, I just didn't know what. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready, Brennan told him. The whole story for the first time since it happened. The night mission in the Gulf of Aden. Lieutenant Kyle Hartman, young and eager and convinced he was invincible, only 26 years old with his whole life ahead of him. The helicopter deployment in brutal seas, 15-foot waves and 40-knot winds. The equipment failure, a defective carabiner that no one had caught during inspection. A microscopic crack in the metal that turned catastrophic under load. Hartman falling, Brennan jumping in after him without hesitation, fighting through the storm to reach him. Getting to him, holding him, trying to keep his head above water. But Hartman's life jacket had been compromised by the fall. He'd taken on too much water, hit his head on the way down, maybe had internal injuries they couldn't see. He was unconscious before Brennan even reached him. And Brennan had tried everything, every technique, every procedure, every trick he'd ever learned. But sometimes the ocean takes what it wants, and there's nothing you can do. I was supposed to save him, Brennan finished, his voice rough. That was my job. That's what rescue swimmers do. We jump in and we bring people back alive. But I couldn't, and everyone kept telling me it wasn't my fault, that I'd done everything right, but I didn't believe them. How could it not be my fault when he died in my arms? When I was the one who was supposed to save him and couldn't? Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark harbor. Then, Cap, can I tell you something? In the 8 years I've worked for you, I've seen you do things that would scare most people half to death. Bringing this boat through weather that sent bigger vessels running for port, navigating through fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet, threading through rocks that would tear the hull open if you were off by even a few yards. Teaching Danny and me how to be real sailors, not just people who work on a boat. You're the best captain I've ever sailed with, and I've sailed with a lot of captains. But you know what else I've seen? Brennan waited. I've seen you hold back, never quite pushing as hard as you could, always playing it safe, even when you didn't need to. Like some part of you thought you didn't deserve to be great at this. Like you were afraid that if you tried too hard and succeeded, it would somehow dishonor Hartman's memory. Or if you tried too hard and failed, it would prove something about you that you were terrified might be true, so you just existed. Good enough to make a living, never good enough to be exceptional. Because being exceptional would mean admitting you're still a rescue swimmer at heart, and you couldn't let yourself be that. The words hit harder than Brennan expected, cutting through his defenses because they were true. He'd spent 8 years being a good captain but never a great one, because greatness would mean acknowledging who he really was. So if the Admiral is offering you a chance to go back to what you were born to do, Jack continued, then maybe you should take it, not for him, not to prove anything to anyone else, but for yourself. Because you deserve to stop punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault, and because those kids who'll be learning from you, they deserve to learn from the best. And like it or not, Cap, that's you. Brennan looked out at the dark harbor, at the lights reflecting off the calm water, so different from the churning violence of the storm a few days ago, so different from the Gulf of Aden 23 years ago. I'm 65 years old, he said. What if I can't do it anymore? What if I'm too old, too slow, too washed up? What if I get out there and prove that I really am past my prime? You jumped into a hurricane to save 6 people, Jack pointed out, his voice dry. At 65, with no training in 23 years, and you didn't just save them, you executed 6 perfect rescues in conditions that would have killed swimmers half your age. You gave your safety line to a panicking victim, and trusted your life to a rope that wasn't rated for rescue work. You went back into a sinking ship for one more person when you were already exhausted. If that's what washed up looks like, then I want to be washed up when I grow up. Despite everything, Brennan felt a smile tug at his lips. And what about you and Danny? He asked. I can't just abandon the boat, abandon you guys. The second chance is our livelihood. Jack smiled. Cap, I've been waiting 8 years for you to figure out what you really want to do with your life. If that's teaching Navy rescue swimmers, then go do it. Danny and I can handle the second chance. Hell, maybe I'll finally get to be the captain. Been wanting to repaint the wheelhouse for years, but you never let me. The wheelhouse is fine the way it is. It's got water stains from 1998. Cap. Character. That's not character, that's neglect. They sat together in comfortable silence as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting it in shades of pink and gold. Brennan thought about Whitmore's offer, about Kyle Hartman, about the 6 people he'd saved from the Pacific Surveyor, about the 23 years he'd spent running from himself, about second chances, and whether he deserved one. I think I'm going to do it, Brennan said finally. Take the job, I mean. Good, Jack said simply, like there had never been any doubt. But I'm not selling the boat, she's still mine. And I expect to come out here on weekends when I can. Make sure you're not running her aground or painting the wheelhouse some god-awful color. Wouldn't dream of it, Cap. Though I was thinking maybe a nice seafoam green. Don't even joke about that. Who says I'm joking? The Navy Training Center at Newport was bigger than Brennan remembered. Though to be fair, the last time he'd been on a military base was 23 years ago, and memory has a way of distorting things, making them smaller or larger than they actually were. He drove through the front gate in his old pickup truck, feeling distinctly out of place among the pristine government vehicles and the occasional sports car that probably belonged to some young officer. Everyone else was in uniform, walking with that precise military bearing that Brennan had once possessed but lost somewhere along the way to becoming a fisherman. He felt like an imposter, like someone pretending to be something he wasn't anymore. Vice Admiral Whitmore had given him directions to the rescue swimmer training facility, Building 18, at the far end of the base near the water. Brennan found it without trouble, a massive hangar-style structure with a helicopter pad, several Navy Seahawks parked in neat rows, and what looked like an Olympic-sized pool visible through the open bay doors. He parked in a visitor spot, and sat in his truck for a moment, gathering courage. His ribs still ached from hitting the hull of the second chance, his muscles were still sore from the rescue. He was 65 years old, and about to walk into a facility full of people half his age who were in peak physical condition. This was stupid. He should turn around, drive back to the marina, forget this whole thing. Someone knocked on his window. Brennan jumped, then felt foolish for jumping. A young man in Navy fatigue stood outside, hand raised in greeting. He looked barely old enough to vote, much less jump out of helicopters into rough seas. Fresh-faced, eager, probably ran 10 miles before breakfast just for fun. Brennan rolled down the window. Help you? Are you Captain Brennan, sir? The young man asked. Just Brennan, I'm not military anymore. Petty Officer First Class Blake Callahan, sir. The Admiral asked me to watch for you, show you around the facility. He paused, then added with genuine respect. Everyone here knows what you did last week, saving those 6 people from the Pacific Surveyor in conditions that would have killed most swimmers. That earns you a sir whether you're military or not. Brennan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He climbed out of his truck feeling every one of his 65 years and followed Callahan toward the building. This way, sir, Callahan said, leading him through a side entrance.
The interior of the training facility was impressive. The pool was even larger than it looked from outside, an enormous rectangle of water with wave generators along one side, and what looked like current machines at the far end. Along the opposite wall were climbing structures, rope courses and other equipment for building the strength and endurance rescue swimmers needed. Everything was clean, modern, well-maintained, and everywhere young men and women in training gear, running laps around the pool, climbing the rope courses, swimming endless laps, pushing themselves to their limits and beyond. Brennan watched them with a mixture of admiration and melancholy. He'd been like that once. Young, strong, convinced he could save the world one person at a time. The current class has 22 candidates, Callahan explained as they walked along the edge of the pool. They're 6 weeks into the 16-week program. We start with about 30, but attrition is high in the first few weeks. The ones who are left are tough, smart, determined. How many typically graduate? Brennan asked. About 14 to 16 out of the original 30. Rescue swimmer training has the highest attrition rate of any program in the Navy, sir. It's not for everyone. Takes a specific combination of physical ability, mental toughness, and, Callahan paused, searching for the word. The willingness to jump, Brennan supplied quietly. Callahan's face lit up. Exactly, sir. That's exactly it. You can teach someone to swim, you can teach them procedures, but you can't teach someone to be willing to jump into a storm to save a stranger. Either they have it or they don't. They walked along the edge of the pool watching candidates practice water entries from increasingly high platforms. One young woman, couldn't be more than 23, stood at the top of a 30-foot tower, clearly terrified but determined not to show it. Her body language screamed reluctance even from this distance. She jumped. The form was all wrong, arms flailing slightly, body tilted at the wrong angle, hesitation visible in every movement. She hit the water hard and came up sputtering, coughing, clearly having taken water down the wrong pipe. Better, Hayes, the instructor called from poolside, his voice firm but not unkind. But you're still afraid of the entry. You're hesitating at the top. That's adding about 20 seconds to your time. You have to commit. Go again. The young woman, Hayes, climbed out and trudged back toward the ladder, shoulders slumped in a way that suggested she'd been doing this for a while without success. That's Emma Hayes, Callahan said quietly. She's failed this drill 18 times now. She gets 2 more attempts. If she can't do it right by attempt 20, she's out of the program. Brennan watched Hayes climb the ladder slowly, each step an effort, dreading what came next. He knew that feeling intimately. The fear of failing, of falling, of proving that you didn't have what it took. The fear that everyone was watching you fail. The fear that you'd let yourself down. At the top of the tower, Hayes stood at the edge, staring down at the water 30 feet below. Her whole body was tense, locked up with anticipation and dread. The instructor was saying something from below, probably encouragement, but Brennan couldn't hear it from this distance. She's going to fail again, Callahan said, resignation in his voice. Look at her. She's already defeated herself before she even jumps. Brennan found himself moving toward the pool before he consciously decided to do it, his body operating on instinct. Hey Hayes, he called up. She looked down, startled to hear an unfamiliar voice, squinting against the sunlight. Sir, don't look at the water, look at me, Brennan instructed, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The water's not your enemy. Fear is your enemy, and the thing about fear is that it gets louder the longer you listen to it. So stop listening, stop thinking, just jump. I can't, Hayes called back, her voice breaking slightly. I've tried 18 times, I just can't do it. I'm going to wash out. You're right about one thing, Brennan agreed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than sympathetic. You can't do it perfectly. Nobody can, not their first time, not even their 100th time. Every entry can be better. But you can do it. And doing it scared counts just as much as doing it fearless. Maybe more because it takes more courage. So jump. Stop waiting for the fear to go away. It won't. Jump anyway. For a moment Hayes just stared down at him, this stranger in civilian clothes who was speaking to her with more confidence than she felt. Then before she could overthink it again, before fear could talk her out of it one more time, she jumped. The form still wasn't perfect. There was still hesitation in her movements, still a slight panic in how her arms positioned themselves, but it was better. Noticeably better. She hit the water, went under, came up gasping. And the look on her face when she surfaced, surprise and relief and something like joy all mixed together, that was something Brennan understood deeply. Much better. The instructor called genuine praise in his voice now. You cut 8 seconds off your time. Again. This time, Hayes climbed the ladder with purpose instead of dread. And when she jumped, the fear was still there, you could still see it in the tension of her shoulders, but it didn't control her anymore. She was jumping despite the fear, not waiting for it to disappear. How did you do that? Callahan asked Brennan, genuine wonder in his voice. Brennan shrugged. I've been where she is. Sometimes all someone needs is permission to be scared and do it anyway. Permission to stop waiting for courage and just act despite the fear. The Admiral said you were a natural teacher. I'm starting to see why. They continued the tour. Callahan showed Brennan the classroom spaces where candidates learned emergency medical procedures, navigation, weather prediction, ocean dynamics, and equipment maintenance. The equipment room where they stored survival suits, harnesses, rescue litters, flotation devices, and all the other gear a rescue swimmer might need. The simulation room with its virtual reality systems for practicing rescues. The medical bay where injuries were treated. The office that would be Brennan's if he decided to stay, small but functional, with a window overlooking the training pool and a desk that had probably been government issue since the Cold War. Finally they arrived at a small auditorium where the current class of candidates was assembled for an afternoon lecture on hypothermia management and cold water survival. Vice Admiral Whitmore stood at the front, and when he saw Brennan enter with Callahan, he smiled. Ah, perfect timing, Whitmore said, gesturing for them to come forward. Class, I want you to meet someone. This is Marcus Brennan, former Navy rescue swimmer, and as of last week, the man who pulled 6 people off a sinking research vessel in hurricane conditions. Mr. Brennan has agreed to join our training program as a civilian instructor. 22 faces turned toward Brennan, curious, skeptical, assessing. The skeptical ones were probably wondering what a 65-year-old fisherman could teach them. Brennan understood, he'd wondered the same. Mr. Brennan, Whitmore said, would you like to say a few words? He didn't. Public speaking had never been his strength, but he found himself walking forward anyway, drawn by duty, or maybe memory. He looked at the young faces and saw himself among them. Saw Kyle Hartman, forever 26. Saw the people he'd saved, and the one he hadn't. I'm not good at speeches, he began, voice rough from years of shouting over engines and surf. So I'll keep this short. This program is the hardest thing you'll ever do. Some of you won't finish. That's not failure, just truth. This job isn't for everyone. He paused, meeting their eyes. But for those who make it, understand this, being a rescue swimmer isn't about being the strongest or fastest. It's about being the one who jumps anyway. Doing the job when you're terrified. Knowing you can't save everyone, but trying like hell to save them anyway. Getting back in the water after the worst day of your life because someone out there needs you. He thought of Hartman, of 23 years spent believing he'd failed, of 6 people alive from the Pacific Surveyor, because he'd finally remembered who he was. I lost someone once, Brennan said quietly. Lieutenant Kyle Hartman, 26. His carabiner failed during a rescue. I did everything right by the book. But sometimes you do everything right and people still die. The ocean doesn't care about your intentions, it just takes. The room was silent, even the skeptics listened. For 23 years I believed I'd failed him. I let that loss define me. I walked away because I couldn't accept that sometimes bad things happen despite our best efforts. That sometimes it's not your fault. He found Emma Hayes in the front row, hair still damp from training, watching him closely. But I was wrong, Brennan said. I didn't fail because I couldn't save Kyle. I failed because I stopped trying to save anyone after that. I let one bad day erase every good one. That's the only failure that matters, giving up, letting fear win. He drew a slow breath. So here's my advice, do the job, jump, save who you can, and when you can't, because someday you won't, mourn them, honor them, then move on and save the next person. This world needs people willing to jump. If you're in this room, that's who you are. Don't let one loss make you forget everyone you saved. Don't waste 23 years like I did. He stepped back from the podium, embarrassed by how much he'd revealed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Emma Hayes began to clap. Another joined. Then the entire room rose, applause rolling like surf.
Brennan felt heat rise to his face. He wasn't used to applause, didn't want it. But Whitmore was smiling with something like pride, and Hayes was nodding as if she understood. The other candidates were looking at him differently now, not as an old fisherman, but as one of them. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe he deserved this second chance after all. Brennan's first official day as an instructor started at 0500 hours, 5 in the morning, military time that he hadn't used in over 2 decades. He'd been up since 4, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first day of rescue swimmer training 40+ years ago. He'd changed his shirt 3 times before settling on simple black workout gear that wouldn't make him stand out, though at 65 he was going to stand out anyway. The candidates were already in the pool when he arrived, doing warm-up laps in perfect formation. Callahan met him at the door. "Morning, Mr. Brennan. You ready for your first session?" "As ready as I'll ever be." "What's on the schedule?" "Open water rescue scenarios. We bus the candidates down to the beach about 12 miles south of here, simulate various emergency conditions, see how they perform under pressure. You'll be observing today with Chief Donovan and me, getting a feel for how we run things. Next week you'll start taking point on some of the exercises." The beach was about 20 minutes away by bus, a stretch of Oregon coastline wild enough to simulate the conditions rescue swimmers might face in real operations. By the time they arrived, the sun was just starting to rise, painting the ocean in shades of gold and orange. The water looked deceptively calm, but Brennan could see the underlying power in the swells, the hidden currents that could turn dangerous in an instant. Beautiful, dangerous. He'd missed this more than he'd realized. The lead instructor, Chief Petty Officer Wade Donovan, a grizzled veteran who looked like he'd been carved from granite, gathered the candidates around. "All right, listen up," Donovan barked, his voice cutting through the sound of waves. "Today's scenario: civilian sailboat capsized in moderate seas, 2 victims in the water, current pulling them toward rocks. Standard rescue protocols apply, but here's the twist: 1 victim is unconscious, the other is panicking. You need to prioritize, execute and extract. Brennan, you want to add anything before we start?" All eyes turned to Brennan. He wasn't used to being put on the spot like this, but he told Whitmore he could do this job. "Time to prove it." "Yeah," Brennan said, stepping forward. "Before any of you enter the water, I want you to take 30 seconds, not to psych yourself up, not to rehearse your moves, just to observe. Look at the actual conditions: wind direction and speed, wave patterns, current direction and strength. Where are the victims? What hazards are between you and them? What's the worst thing that could happen, and how do you prevent it? Your brain is your first piece of rescue equipment. Use it before you use anything else. Because once you're in that water, you won't have time to think. You'll be reacting. So do your thinking now." Donovan nodded approvingly. "You heard the man. Hayes, Crawford, you're up first. Get suited." Emma Hayes, the young woman Brennan had encouraged on the tower, gave him a quick nervous smile as she pulled on her survival suit, checking each seal and zipper with methodical precision. Mitchell Crawford, her partner for this exercise, was all business, a stocky young man with the build of a college linebacker, who was checking his equipment with the same careful attention to detail. 2 instructors in wetsuits played the role of victims, swimming out past the breaking waves and then pretending to struggle. It looked fake from shore, the exaggerated flailing, the theatrical calls for help, but Brennan knew that in the water, with adrenaline pumping and waves hitting you in the face, everything felt devastatingly real. "Go," Donovan shouted. Crawford and Hayes ran into the water, high-stepping through the shallows, then diving under the first breaking wave with practiced timing. Brennan watched them swim, analyzing their technique with the critical eye of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Crawford was strong but inefficient, using too much energy, trying to power through the water, instead of working with the ocean's natural rhythms. He'd tire himself out before reaching the victim, if this were a real long-distance rescue. Hayes was smaller, lighter, but more efficient, reading the waves, letting them carry her when possible, only fighting when absolutely necessary. They reached the victims. One of the instructors, named Reynolds, a former college swimmer, who looked like he could bench press a small car, was playing the unconscious victim, floating face down in a way that looked disturbingly realistic. The other instructor, Brooks, was playing the panicking victim, and he immediately started thrashing and grabbing at Crawford in a way that would have drowned them both in a real scenario. This was the real test: could Crawford control a panicking victim who outweighed him by at least 40 pounds? For a moment it looked like Crawford might fail. Brooks was pulling him under, simulating the death grip panic of a drowning person who'll take their rescuer down with them. But Crawford remembered his training, executing a proper release technique, a sharp twist and controlled push that broke the hold without injuring the victim, and got behind Brooks in a cross-chest carry, one arm across the victim's chest, swimming side-stroke back toward shore. Hayes had reached Reynolds, the unconscious victim, and was assessing the situation. Brennan could see her thinking it through, checking for breathing, establishing a proper carry that would keep the victim's face above water, beginning the tow back to shore. She was struggling. Reynolds wasn't making it easy, using his weight to simulate a truly deadweight victim, but she was maintaining control, keeping his airway clear, making steady progress. Then Brennan saw it, and his blood ran cold. A larger set of waves building offshore, the kind most people wouldn't notice, but that every experienced ocean swimmer learned to read. These weren't normal waves. These were set waves, the bigger ones that came in groups, the ones that could turn a manageable situation into a disaster in seconds. Hayes, Brennan shouted, his voice carrying over the sound of the surf. Big set coming, get to the inside now. Hayes looked back, saw the waves building, and understood immediately. She changed direction, angling toward the calmer water inside the braking zone, pulling Reynolds with her, her legs kicking with renewed urgency. But the wave came faster than expected, the ocean always moving quicker than you thought it would. It picked Hayes and Reynolds up like toys, lifting them 10 feet in the air, and then slammed them down in the impact zone. The worst possible place to be, where tons of water crashed down with enough force to break bones. Brennan saw Hayes go under, saw her lose her grip on Reynolds. When they both surfaced, they were separated by 20 feet, and the current, stronger here in the impact zone, was pulling them both toward a nasty-looking outcrop of rocks, maybe 50 yards down the beach. "She's in trouble," Callahan said, beside Brennan, tension in his voice. Brennan could see it clearly. Hayes was panicking, not full panic yet, but getting there fast. She was swimming after Reynolds instead of letting him self-rescue, which meant she didn't trust his training, or didn't realize he was actually an instructor who could save himself. She was fighting the current instead of working with it, burning energy she didn't have, making the situation worse with every passing second. In about 45 seconds, both she and Reynolds would get smashed into those rocks. Hayes would probably survive. She was wearing a survival suit with good impact protection, but it would hurt, might break something, and would definitely end her chances of finishing the program. "Should we pull them out?" Callahan asked Donovan. Donovan was watching through binoculars, his jaw tight with the calculus of training versus safety. "Give her 15 more seconds. She needs to figure this out herself." But Brennan was already moving, already pulling off his shirt, already kicking off his shoes. His body was still sore from the Pacific Surveyor rescue 4 days ago. His ribs still ached, but that didn't matter. "Brennan, what are you doing?" Donovan demanded. "Saving my student," Brennan replied, and ran into the water. The ocean hit him like a memory, cold, powerful, familiar, unforgiving. His body remembered this, even after all these years, even with all the aches and pains of age. He dove under the breaking waves and started swimming, not toward Hayes, but toward where the current would take her, where she'd be in 30 seconds, if she kept fighting the water. He'd calculated right. Hayes was still fighting, still trying to swim against the current toward Reynolds, still exhausting herself. Brennan intercepted her, grabbed her by the rescue harness from behind. "Stop fighting," he shouted over the roar of waves, his voice hoarse. "You can't beat this current. Let it take us parallel to shore, past the rocks, then we'll swim out and around." But Reynolds, Hayes started, panic making her voice high, "is a trained instructor who knows how to save himself. You're not rescuing him, he's training you. You can't help anyone if you're smashed on those rocks. Now swim with me, not against the water." They let the current carry them parallel to shore, Brennan keeping a firm grip on Hayes's harness, guiding her, teaching her through demonstration how to read water and work with it, instead of against it. The rocks loomed close, close enough that Brennan could see barnacles encrusted on them, close enough to be dangerous, but he'd been reading water currents since before Hayes was born. He knew exactly when to start swimming parallel to shore, using a natural rip current to pull them away from danger, and then out beyond the break zone. By the time they made it back to the beach, Reynolds had already self-rescued and swum back in, and Crawford had successfully brought Brooks to shore. Hayes collapsed on the sand, breathing hard, coughing up seawater, her face a mixture of shame and frustration. Brennan knelt beside her, his own breathing labored, his 65-year-old lungs reminding him that he wasn't 25 anymore. "You okay?" "I failed," Hayes gasped between coughs, lost control, panicked, "had to be rescued myself. I'm done, I'm out of the program." "You're not done, you made a mistake, there's a difference. I could have gotten us both killed, Reynolds and me, but you didn't, and now you know what panic feels like in the water. Now you know how to recognize it in yourself before it takes over completely. Now you know what it feels like to fight a current you can't beat. That's valuable knowledge. Most swimmers don't figure that out until it's too late, and then they don't get a second chance to learn from it." Donovan had waded out to meet them, and he looked at Brennan with an expression that might have been respect or might have been exasperation, hard to tell with Donovan. "That was either the stupidest thing I've ever seen an instructor do, or the bravest," Donovan said. "Haven't decided which yet. Didn't realize there was a decision to make," Brennan replied, still trying to catch his breath. "She was in trouble. I went in, that's the job. You're 65 years old and you just executed a combat rescue in rough water, without any warm-up, without proper equipment. Your ribs are probably still bruised from last week." "They are. What's your point?" Donovan stared at him for a moment, then the corners of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "No point. Welcome to the team, Brennan. You'll fit in just fine." The rest of the day's training went smoother. Brennan watched, learned the facility's procedures and teaching methods, occasionally offered suggestions based on his decades of experience. The candidates warmed up to him quickly. Nothing builds respect like someone who's willing to jump in the water to save you, who practices what he preaches. By the time they loaded back onto the buses that evening, Brennan was exhausted but satisfied. His body would punish him tomorrow. He already knew that. His ribs were sending sharp complaints with every breath, his muscles were trembling with fatigue, and he was pretty sure he'd pulled something in his shoulder. But this felt right. This felt like something he was supposed to be doing. Emma Hayes approached him as they were packing up equipment, her hair still damp from the ocean. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for earlier. I really would have hurt myself if you hadn't intervened." "You would have figured it out eventually," Brennan said, "but you're welcome. And Hayes, don't quit. You've got good instincts. You just need to learn to trust them more than you trust your fear." "I'll try. That's all any of us can do. Try, fail, learn, try again. That's how you become good at this. Not by being perfect, by being persistent." On the bus ride back to base, Brennan sat next to Callahan, staring out the window at the ocean passing by. "I was wrong about you," Callahan admitted quietly. "How so?" "When I heard they were bringing in a 65-year-old fisherman as an instructor, I thought it was some kind of publicity stunt. You know, feel-good story about the guy who got lucky once during a storm. But you're not lucky, you're the real deal. You've still got it." Brennan looked out the window at the ocean, at the waves that had nearly killed him more times than he could count, that had taken Kyle Hartman, that had given him purpose and meaning for most of his life. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'm just too stubborn to admit I'm too old for this." "Those might be the same thing, sir." "Yeah," Brennan agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. "They might be." That night he called Jack from his temporary apartment on base, a simple efficiency unit in the visiting personnel housing. "How was the first day?" Jack asked. "Harder than I expected, easier than I feared. Jumped in the ocean to save a candidate who got in trouble during a training exercise." "Of course you did. You're Brennan, that's what you do. How's the body holding up?" "I'll let you know tomorrow morning when I try to get out of bed. Might need a crane." "How's the second chance?" "Still floating. We took her out this morning, pulled a decent haul. Danny's getting pretty good at reading the fish finder. He better not be messing with my settings." "Your settings are from 2008, Cap. They need to be messed with. They're calibrated perfectly. They're older than some of the fish we're catching." Despite his exhaustion, despite his aching body, Brennan laughed. "Jack? Yeah, Cap, thanks for pushing me to do this. I think it might be the right call." "I know it is. Get some sleep, old man. Sounds like you earned it." After he hung up,
Brennan stood at his window, looking out at the base, at the distant silhouettes of the training facility and the helicopters. Somewhere out there, 22 candidates were sleeping, dreaming of becoming rescue swimmers. Some would make it, some wouldn't, but all of them were trying, just like him. He was 65 years old and he was finally doing what he was meant to do. Better late than never. 3 months had passed since Brennan joined the training program. The days had flown, mornings of drills and lectures, nights spent grading reports, weekends back on the second chance to let the ocean reset his body. 22 candidates had become 15. 7 had washed out, not from weakness, but because not everyone was built for what this job demanded. The ones who remained were exceptional. Among them, Emma Hayes had become his quiet protégé, curious, relentless, transformed from the nervous recruit who once froze on a tower. Today was their final test, a full-scale simulation that combined everything they'd learned. Multiple rescues, changing conditions, decisions under pressure. Brennan stood on the beach with Chief Donovan, watching them prep. The morning was almost too calm. He'd been on the sea long enough to know calm never lasted. "They're ready," Donovan said. "One of the best classes I've seen. You've made a real difference. Pass rates are up, and they think like rescue swimmers now, not athletes." "They did the work," Brennan said. The simulation began at 1,000 hours. For 2 hours, everything ran smoothly. Rescues, executed with precision, teamwork seamless. Brennan felt something close to pride, rare and quiet. Then the weather turned. It happened fast, a shift in the air, clouds rushing in, the wind doubling, the waves building. Brennan felt it a minute before it hit. "Everyone out of the water," Donovan barked into his radio. But nature doesn't wait. The wind jumped from 10 knots to 30, swells doubled, then tripled. And far out beyond the surf line, Brennan spotted a dark, churning band of water, a riptide forming. Then he saw it, Mitch Crawford from Hayes's team caught in the current. He was swimming straight against it, strong, fast, and losing. Within seconds he'd been dragged hundreds of yards offshore. "Crawford's in trouble," Brennan said, already stripping off his jacket. "Coast Guard's on the way," Donovan called. 12 minutes, too long. Brennan was already running into the surf before logic could catch up. The Pacific hit him like ice. His muscles screamed, but his body remembered. Dive under the breakers, use the troughs, time your breathing. He heard shouting behind him. Donovan, Hayes, but the ocean swallowed the rest. He swam harder than he had in years. Every stroke hurt. Every breath felt borrowed. But quitting wasn't an option. Crawford's arms were flailing now, panic setting in. Brennan reached him 6 endless minutes later, just as the young man slipped beneath a cresting wave. Brennan caught his harness. "Stop fighting," he gasped. "We swim parallel. Get out of the current first." "I can't." "Yes you can. I'm not leaving you, and that means you're not quitting." "Kick." Crawford obeyed, barely. Brennan hooked an arm across his chest, and started the cross-chest carry. The current fought them, relentless. His shoulders burned, his heart hammered against bruised ribs that had never healed right. He'd taught this technique 100 times. Now it was saving both their lives, if his body held out. Minutes blurred. When the current finally weakened, Brennan angled toward shore, using the swells to push them in. 70 yards left. 50. His strength failed at 40. His arms refused to move. So this is how it ends, he thought, oddly calm. Like Hartman. In the water, then voices, splashes, hands. Hayes was there, leading 3 candidates, forming a rescue chain exactly as he drilled them. Together they hauled Crawford and Brennan through the surf to the sand. Paramedics rushed in. Brennan tried to sit up. "I'm fine," he croaked. "You're hypothermic and 65, the medic snapped. "Lie still." Too tired to argue, he obeyed. Hayes knelt beside him, face streaked with seawater and tears. "You saved him," she whispered. "You saved us," Brennan said through the oxygen mask. "You followed the lesson. You're the one who taught it." Donovan arrived, shaking his head. "Ambulance is here. Crawford's stable. As for you, half miracle, half liability." Despite everything, Brennan smiled. As they loaded him up, he saw the 15 candidates standing together, silent, watching. They looked shaken, but changed. They'd just seen what it truly meant to be a rescue swimmer. The doors closed, and exhaustion claimed him. Brennan spent 2 days in the hospital, protesting the entire time. The doctors warned about cardiac stress, hypothermia, common sense. He signed himself out anyway. Graduation was in 4 days, and he wasn't going to miss it. Vice Admiral Whitmore showed up the next morning. "You're an idiot," the Admiral said, as soon as Brennan opened the door. Coffee, Brennan offered. It's terrible, but hot. You nearly killed yourself. Another 5 minutes and you'd have had a heart attack. But I didn't. Crawford's alive. Everyone learned what this job really costs. Call it a win. Whitmore sighed but smiled despite himself. You haven't changed. Still jumping in where you shouldn't. Some habits stick, Brennan said. They sat in his cramped living room with coffee that tasted like burnt rope. You know what the candidates call you? Whitmore asked. I'm afraid to find out. The old man who won't quit, apparently, with affection. You've become a legend here, Whitmore said. 65 and still out swimming half the fleet. They respect that. Brennan chuckled, then winced. Everything hurts. Doctor says, my heart's had enough excitement for a year. And yet you'd do it again, Whitmore said. Brennan met his eyes. Yeah, I would. Whitmore set his cup down and pulled a folder from his briefcase. Then you'll understand why I'm offering you a promotion. Chief Donovan's retiring. We want you as director of training. You'd shape the curriculum, oversee instructors, still teach once a week. More leadership, less adrenaline. I've only been here 3 months. You've done more in 3 months than most do in 3 years. Pass rates are up, morale's higher, and the trainees are learning why they jump, not just how. That's you. Brennan considered it. Director of training, a big title, more responsibility, more chance to make a difference. I'll take it, he said. On one condition, the second chance stays mine. When I'm not needed, I go fishing. I need the water. Deal, Whitmore said, shaking his hand. Welcome aboard, Director Brennan. Whitmore reached into the folder again. There's one more thing, something I should have given you 23 years ago. He handed Brennan a document stamped with Navy insignia, letter of commendation. Aviation rescue swimmer, First Class Marcus Brennan is commended for exceptional bravery and skill during rescue operations in the Gulf of Aden. Despite catastrophic equipment failure, resulting in the death of Lieutenant Kyle Hartman, swimmer Brennan performed flawlessly, under impossible conditions, representing the highest traditions of the U.S. Navy. Below it lay a second certificate, dated last week, Civilian Service Award, for exceptional service to the Navy Rescue Swimmer Training Program, and heroic action saving 6 civilians from the research vessel Pacific Surveyor, and candidate Mitchell Crawford during training. His dedication to teaching and the values of naval aviation make him an invaluable asset to the U.S. Navy. Brennan stared at the pages until the words blurred. 23 years, 2 pieces of paper, one for the man he was, one for the man he'd become. Thank you, he said quietly. You earned both, Whitmore replied, the first for surviving, the second for coming back. When Whitmore left, Brennan sat alone with the certificates, reading them again and again until the meaning finally settled in. He wasn't a failure, he never had been. He was a rescue swimmer, always had been, always would be, and now he had the chance to make sure the next generation knew what that meant. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that made the Oregon coast look like paradise. 15 candidates stood in formation, dress whites crisp, rescue swimmer insignias gleaming. 4 months ago, they'd been uncertain recruits. Now they were professionals. Brennan stood at the back, watching Vice Admiral Whitmore at the podium. You are now part of an elite group, Whitmore said, his voice carrying across the parade ground. Less than 1% of those who attempt this program finish it. Be proud, but stay humble. The training never ends. Every rescue, every mission, every person you pull from the water is another lesson. Stay sharp, stay alive, and remember what you learned here. The willingness to jump when others won't. When Whitmore finished, Chief Donovan took the podium. This year's honor graduate showed exceptional judgment and leadership. When her instructor was in danger during the final exercise, she led a team into rough water to save him. That decision likely saved 2 lives. The honor graduate for this class is Petty Officer 3rd Class Emma Hayes. Hayes walked forward, stunned and proud. Brennan felt an ache of pride so strong it surprised him. 4 months ago, she'd frozen on a 30-foot tower. Now she stood before the Navy's best. After the ceremony came the celebration. Families took photos, music played, laughter rose with the sea breeze. Brennan tried to slip away, but Hayes caught him. Mr. Brennan, she said, her medal catching the sunlight. Thank you for everything, for not giving up on me when I couldn't jump, for showing me that fear doesn't have to win. And for going into the water after Crawford. You taught me what this job really means. You taught yourself, Brennan said.
I just reminded you what was already there. She smiled. I got my first assignment, 3rd Fleet, San Diego, search and rescue. They're lucky to have you, he said. You'll save a lot of lives. That's the job, right? That's the promise, Brennan said. She hugged him quickly, then ran back to her family. Brennan stayed where he was, watching the young graduates laugh in the sunlight. He'd come here to lecture. Somehow, he'd ended up finding his way back to himself. She's going to be exceptional, a voice said. Doctor. Rachel Whitmore stood beside him, dressed in civilian clothes, looking more like someone's mother than the scientist he'd pulled from the Pacific. Dr. Whitmore, Brennan said. Didn't expect to see you. I wouldn't miss it, she said. My father won't stop talking about this class, or about you, and I wanted to see the man who saved my life looking healthy again. You were half dead last time I saw you. Better now, he said. Doctor cleared me, with warnings. I heard you're director of training. Congratulations. Still getting used to it, Brennan admitted. More paperwork than I like. Less water, but I'll manage. They watched the crowd in silence until Rachel spoke again. I've rebuilt the project. New funding. New vessel launching next spring. This time, everything's backed up in the cloud. No more irreplaceable data lost to the sea. That's good, Brennan said softly. You were right, she said. Our work isn't more important than our lives. You reminded me of that. Thank you. Before Brennan could reply, Vice Admiral Whitmore joined them. Rachel Marcus, fine ceremony, wasn't it? Congratulations, Dad, Rachel said. The credit goes to Marcus, Whitmore replied. He's the one shaping these swimmers. Brennan smiled faintly. I just show them what's possible, Whitmore chuckled. Come walk with me. They moved toward the edge of the field, where the ocean glimmered under the sun. You know, Whitmore said, I never told you what I should have years ago. You were the best rescue swimmer I ever commanded, not because you were fearless, but because you understood what the job meant. It's not about glory, it's about being willing to jump to risk everything for a stranger. I lost that for a while, Brennan said. You lost faith in yourself, but you never lost the instinct. It's why you turned your boat into that storm. Why you went back for Crawford, why you're here now. You're a rescue swimmer. It's not what you do, it's who you are. Brennan stared out at the horizon. Thank you, for bringing me that report, for giving me a chance to finish what I started, Whitmore smiled. You gave yourself that chance. I just made sure you knew the truth. The storm rolled in fast, one of those sudden tempests that ambushed the Oregon coast. Not as bad as the one that sank the Pacific Surveyor, but bad enough to have the Coast Guard stretched thin. Director of Training, Marcus Brennan sat in his office, listening to the radio. At 67, he trusted instinct more than forecasts, and instinct said the storm was worsening. His phone rang. Director Brennan, this is Coast Guard operations. Fishing vessel taking on water, 7 miles offshore. 2 cutters already deployed elsewhere. We're out of rescue swimmers. They're asking if we have anyone qualified. Brennan checked the roster. Every instructor was already out. The rest were trainees. What's their window? He asked. 25, maybe 30 minutes before she goes down. 4 people aboard. Brennan stood, already reaching for his jacket. I'm qualified. Sir, with respect, you're 67. Protocol doesn't save lives. Get me a helicopter. Director, that's an order. 20 minutes later, the Seahawk cut through the wind. Beside him sat Petty Officer First Class Emma Hayes, 2 years older, decorated, confident. Just like training, right, Director? She shouted over the noise. Brennan grinned. Just like training, except when it's not. Below them, the fishing boat pitched in the waves, half submerged. 4 figures clung to the rail. Your call, the pilot said. Brennan scanned the scene, wind direction, current, wave timing, all processed in seconds. We go together. Hayes takes the first 2, I'll get the rest. Sir, you don't have to. I know, Brennan said, locking his harness, but I want to. This is who I am. The door opened, wind howled in, salt spray filled the air. Brennan looked at Hayes, steady, fearless, everything he'd hoped she'd become. Ready, old man, she called. Been ready for 47 years, he said. They dropped into the storm. The cold hit like a punch, but Brennan's body remembered every move. The water surged around them, furious and alive. The vessel tilted, the 4 sailors shouting for help. Hayes moved fast, efficient, pulling the first 2 clear. Brennan reached the last pair, one conscious, one barely so. guiding them toward the hoist line as waves hammered around them. The helicopter lifted the first group away. Brennan stayed with the last man, holding his head above water, waiting his turn. Muscles burned, joints screamed, the sea roared in his ears, but he kept the man afloat until the cable dropped again. Hayes came down for the final lift. "Got him?" she yelled. "Yeah," Brennan gasped. "Let's finish this." They rose together through the spray, 2 swimmers and 1 survivor, the storm raging beneath them. When the Seahawk turned toward shore, Brennan looked down at the dark sea, his old adversary, his old teacher, and smiled faintly. Some people get second chances, some people earn them, and some spend their whole lives learning what they mean. Marcus Brennan had finally figured it out. As the helicopter carried them toward land, one thought filled his mind, the same one that had driven him all his life. So others may live. That was the job. That was the promise. And he was still keeping it, because some people never stop being who they truly are. They just forget for a while, and then if they're lucky, if they get a second chance, they remember. Brennan remembered, and he never forgot again.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.